course, I turn our attention right now to Lagos State, where questions are mounting over the proposed 4.237 trillion naira 2026 state budget. Former governorship aspirant Funso Doherty has raised concerns about alleged errors, fiscal misclassification, and the lack of transparency in how resources are allocated. He warned that critical sectors such as education, health, housing, and water supply risk being sidelined, while delayed release of detailed documents limits public scrutiny. Joining me right now to discuss this and more is Funso Doherty, a former Lagos State governorship candidate. Thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's get straight to it. You raised serious concerns as regards the state budget for Lagos. Just walk us through what you have, in terms of reservations here.
Okay, so there were really four things that we highlighted about the 2026 budget. First is that, there are a couple of errors and inaccuracies in the budget as presented by the governor. As you know, what is presented is a summary, and we don't have detail at this stage. But from that summary, we can see that there are a couple of errors. First of all, the recurrent expenditure budget of about 2 trillion includes about 400 billion of capital repayments on the debt, which is a capital expenditure item, and so should not be in recurrent expenditure. So the recurrent expenditure figure of 2 trillion is misstated. And therefore, as a result of that, conceivably, the capital expenditure and the overall budget could possibly be misstated. Now, the second thing is that when you look at the sectoral breakdown, because the sectoral breakdown is provided for the budget, in terms of general public services, health, education, and so on, that breakdown does not add up to the total value of the budget. So that suggests that either the breakdown is wrong or the total budget figure is wrong. And so we just highlighted those two. But that's just the first thing. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, is the fact that, when Lagos State presents its budget like that, it's presented in summary form. And the details are not put, in the public domain so that they can be viewed, reviewed, commented upon as part of the legislative process before it is passed into law. And this is important because if you looked at the 2025 budget, and we highlighted this, there were a number of appropriations there, and we just picked a few and highlighted, that were very questionable in terms of the amount in relation to what they were supposed to be funding, and we couldn't reconcile the two. The budgeted amounts just seemed massively overstated for the items being funded. So clearly, there are a lot of questions to be asked, there.
All right.
So an example for.
Okay, please go on with your example. Sorry,
Yeah, so an example would be, for example, the purchase of generators for State House of Assembly members, where 40 generators were purchased, at a cost of about 4.5 billion, which would suggest a figure of 100 and something million per generator. And the open market cost of those generators is not more than about 15 or 16 million. So it raises a lot of questions. So the point being that if the details of the budget are not in the public domain, then it really doesn't provide the basis for looking at the figures, and we only then get to see that after the budget has been passed, probably at the end of the first quarter or so. Two other things we raised: misplaced budget priorities, and you mentioned it in your intro. If you look at the total amount that's allocated for things like education, housing, health, water, and you add them together, it's just about 17% over the last 5 years. So this is grossly inadequate for a state with the demographics of Lagos, and clearly is what results in the outcomes that we see in terms of quality of life, performance of public schools, and so on. This is part of the underlying reason why. And then finally, we made a point around the absolute number of the aggregate budget, which at 4.2 trillion, just seems overly ambitious to us. And this has been a trend for Lagos State over the past few years, and we've highlighted this.
But if you look at these figures, and for some that would say, looking at also the level of development, infrastructural development in Lagos, it might want to take it to say, maybe it just sticks out here in terms of these figures and what some Lagosians seem to enjoy in terms of amenities.
Tell me what some of those amenities are.
Some might tell you maybe roads, power, and what have you, particularly when it comes to mobility and even businesses too.
There's a difference between propaganda and reality, and we should.
So what's the reality?
So the reality is that 54% of public school students in the last WASC in 2024 failed. 54%. So you are more likely to fail than to pass if you go through a Lagos State public school. Most people don't have access to water. There is a chronic, most people in Lagos live in slums or informal settlements. The majority, there's a chronic housing shortage, right? Even in healthcare, if you look at Lagos amongst its peers, in terms of under 5 mortality, right? Lagos is ranked number 4 out of the 6 southwestern states. So there's the propaganda, but then there's also the reality. Poverty, by the way, is widespread, even in transport, which you talk about. So the majority, even though a lot of money has been spent on transport, the majority of commuters in Lagos move about in, private sector operated, dilapidated buses, driving chaotically on roads that are often bad and are often gridlocked in terms of traffic. So when you look at the reality and you separate it from the propaganda and the talk, the quality of life of the average Lagosian, I think, does not reflect the amount of resources that are spent year after year after year after year.
All right. One other concern, as regards the budget is unrealistic revenue projections. I would like you to speak on this vis-a-vis the ease of doing business in a state like Lagos. The budget proposal has been criticized for these revenue projections, with, of course, actual revenue as of September 2025, that's this year, standing at about 2.07 trillion naira compared to full year projections of about 3.37 trillion. So I'd like you to speak on the revenue projections in lieu of the ease of doing business, in the state.
Well, I think the revenue projections is a pattern now that, we have these very high projections that are never really met. The problem with that really is that when you set your revenue projections, then you set your expenditure programs in line with those revenue expectations. So it undermines the programs and your planning if you start with, unrealistic revenue estimates. And that is what generally we've seen. Part of it also is that when you set these very high revenue expectations, then you now have government agencies who are now acting in a predatory way in order to accomplish these very high budget objectives, right? And who typically will bear the brunt of that? It is those who are less powerful in society that will bear the brunt of it, because those that are more powerful, have their way of getting around these things. So this is often what you see when you now start seeing the predatory behavior of government agencies, because they have these, very lofty, projections, that they have to meet. I think there's another point which needs to be made, and it's related to this, but it's also related to the point about missed priorities. So if you look at, the 2025 budget, for example, we haven't seen details of 2026 yet. But in 2025 budget, there are a couple of things that, it's hard to understand. One of them is consulting and professional services. The state paid about 186 billion naira for consulting and professional services. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of money to spend on consulting. And think about it in relation to, what we've just talked about, expenditure on health, expenditure on education. Now, what are these consulting services that are being paid for, right? One of the things that people have talked about in the past is this question of, alpha, beta consulting and the monies that are paid and there have been a lot of questions raised. This is the category in which you will find things like that. And 106 billion is just an enormous amount of it. There's also an amount, that was appropriated in 2025 of about 67 billion for research and development. What research and development is the state doing to spend 67 billion in 1 year? International travels, about 31 billion. This is a state government, not a federal government. What are we spending 31 billion in 1 year for international travel? So, these are just pointers to the prioritization of government expenditure. And it's when you see prioritization like that, and then you compare it with what I've talked about in terms of quality of life indicators, the human development indicators, which, remember, the primary purpose of government is the welfare and the security of the people.
All right.
So that is the yardstick. It's not whether we've spent money on infrastructure or whatever. Those things are important, but they're important only insofar as they impact the quality of the life of the average citizen.
All right, thank you so much. We'll go on a quick break. When we return, I'll be taking your final thoughts on this matter. Stay with us. We will be right back. Many thanks for staying with us. It's still Politics HQ on News Central Television. I still have my guest with me, Funso Doherty, governorship candidate, Lagos State. It's been a privilege having this conversation. Let's just get to it in 30 seconds. If you were to advise, recommend, maybe some adjustment to this budget in 30 seconds, because we're really pressed for time, what will it be?
The details of the 2026 budget. So it's difficult to make those, and that is the main point, of my intervention, to say that based on 2025, there's a lot of comments to be made, but we haven't seen the detail of 2026. And it doesn't help when you bring the detail of 2026, well into the new year when the whole thing has been passed. We should see it as part of the legislative process. But I would say generally, if the trend of the last 5 years is repeated in 2026, we're going to see again an underinvestment in the people. We're going to see an underinvestment in those things that build the capacity of the people, that enable them to be productive and enable them to be prosperous. And we will see more of an extractive approach to the expenditure of government money than an inclusive approach, that brings in the interest of the larger proportion of the citizenry.
All right.
And if I were to make a recommendation, I would say that is what principally needs to be addressed, to get the human development indicators for people living in Lagos up to where they need to be.
All right. Thank you so much for your time on the program tonight. It's been a privilege having this conversation with you. Once again, thank you.
Thank you very much.